more novel outline workshop with WordCamp. We're gearing up for that novel bootcamp that's coming up in a couple weeks, where you'll be writing your whole book in 90 days. So we're trying to spend this time early to get all that work done of figuring out what is the story, what am I trying to write, what are my clear objectives, and how do I make the clearest roadmap through all of that. Let's get started. Today we'll be talking world building, which is all about that setting, figuring out what is the world that your story takes place in, who are the characters that will populate it, what are the rules that you will establish for yourself, and things like this. We are in a stage channel, so if you'd like to speak out loud, you do have to click that raise hand icon. So that's the request to speak button, and then once you see that green bar at the top that says you've been invited to speak, you do have to accept that. So that's 2 clicks that you have to do in order to speak on the stage, and then you will have to, of course, unmute yourself if you haven't. We're WordCamp, which is a community that's linked to SkillCamp. We have many of these other servers you can see here, which are all about providing free and low-cost classes to help you master skills and reach your life goals. We're linked to ScriptCamp, which is our main and biggest server, and you can find that one and find all the membership info at scriptcamp.net, which is still our sort of home base until we expand the SkillCamp website. But we have lots of different topics: filmmaking, animation, design, and we're adding new things all the time. So we'll show you just some of the classes we have coming up. We have some upcoming free ones, more on ScriptCamp on tone and genre. Fridays at 6 p.m. This next couple weeks are going to be free open public classes in that Friday 6 to 8 p.m. screenwriting slot. And then Saturdays 12 to 2, that's here on WordCamp. That's our novel bootcamp slot, so you can always find a novel outline class in this exact same time slot that you're in right now for the next 4 weeks. We'll be doing this week on world building, next week on scenes and chapters. Final outline lab is on the 1st of June, and that's the one where you are going to try to get those last questions answered and those last problems solved and get your ducks in a row, because you'll be starting the book the next week on the 8th. If you're following with our program, then we'll be starting those novels on June 8th and writing, trying to keep momentum up and keep your word counts going so that you can finish that in 90 days. The last free public class on that is going to be the week 1, which is the 15th of June. This same time slot for all of these, though. So if you just come by for nothing but the next 4 weeks, there will always be a free class in this slot. After that point, you should sign up if you want to take the rest. Scriptcamp.net is the website to go to, where you can get access to all of our classes and activities by signing up for unlimited membership. You will get access to everything, not only on WordCamp about novel writing, but also classes on things like writing screenplays and TV shows, coding, animation, design, language learning, and many other things. You can find more than 100 hours of classes every month with us, and exclusive Discord channels, video library access with all recordings of previous events, huge discounts off consultations and proofreads and things like this. So definitely think about signing up if you're interested in doing more than just the free classes. And Sundays at 10 a.m. we'll be starting that new session of Feature Bootcamp if you're interested in writing a feature film in 8 weeks. That intro class is going to be moving to the Sunday slot on the 14th, June 14th, 10 a.m. to noon on Sundays for 8 weeks. So that's just a small taste of everything we have coming up. That's not even to mention the weekly groups, genre meetups, and writing events. We have things like genre groups like crime and mystery, which just got added on Wednesdays, which is an awesome new group. We have horror group that meets on Tuesdays. We've got lots of different specific niches that you can find something that would match your writing style. So check it out, or you can always start your own or volunteer and run your own group if you want. We have labs for members as well. Those are twice a week, Fridays 12 to 2 and Saturday 4 to 6. That's a time where you can bring whatever questions you have and topics related to the craft, and get those questions answered and share up to 5 pages of whatever you're working on for feedback. Whew, such a mouthful. It's like a full marathon just to get through all the advertising stuff. But we do have plenty of options. Is the point? It's a big unlimited buffet, all you can eat if you sign up for unlimited. So just sign up. Just sign up at scriptcamp.net. You'll be able to find that link to sign up for unlimited. I've just got to the point where I'm just telling you to sign up. What if instead of advertising all the features, I just told you, hey, sign up? What is that? On The Simpsons, they do that episode where the Navy's doing subliminal messaging, and they say, well, Homer, we also do superliminal messaging, where we just tell people, join the Navy. So yeah, that's what we're doing. Join the Navy, join ScriptCamp. So today we're going more into novel outlining stuff. We're going to start by talking about setting and story world. And throughout this class, we're going to go into how to do world building in a couple different main arenas. Physical, social, local, and mystical. And then we will also talk about how to do things like world building in scenes. We'll be reading a character introduction scene from Half a King by Joe Abercrombie, which is a young adult fantasy book that I really loved, and just has such clear, crystal clear, amazing world building and character work. So we'll be reading that today. We'll be talking about concepts like learning curve and fluency, magic systems. This is something specifically for fantasy, but can apply to things like sci-fi or other speculative genres as well. Not necessarily something like magical realism, but it can also pertain to just other genres where you have consistent rules that need to govern the worlds and systems that you've created. Thank you, Becky. Yes, that is the Yvonne Etniage episode. It's a catchy song. So, in terms of the roadmap of where we are in all of this, we start with our story concept and logline, which is what we were looking at the last couple weeks. Just making sure that you have your logline down, you know what the basic idea for your book is, you know what genre you're writing in, what age group you're writing for, which and both of those things will affect your target word count. So you should already by now have a very clear sense of what is the target number of words I'm trying to achieve. So how much story room do I have to maneuver, and how many scenes am I probably going to have? How many chapters would probably fit in this? Of course, that's connected to things like your sense of pacing and how long your chapters are and all of that, which we can also touch on. But by now, the foundations should be in place, and if they aren't, then I would recommend go back, check out our couple previous classes before this. If you're just watching or just joining us now, definitely check out those first few on YouTube, which you can find the recordings of, or Twitch, I think, has them too. So we start with concepts and logline, so we need to make sure we know what we're writing about and what the basic conflict is, who's the main character, what are they trying to achieve. That all just kind of goes into logline. From there, we go into Sketchbook, which is where we start a blank new Google Doc, which has no real structural requirements to it necessarily, but is going to include all of your notes, inspiration, influences, research, ideas, maybe snippets of dialogue or character profiles. You can copy and paste links, videos, anything that is going to help you sort of figure out what is going to go in the story. I'm writing a historical right now, so my sketchbook, as you can expect, is filled with sections from books, nonfiction books that I've copied and pasted in about the cities and countries that I'm writing about. And also, we have links to, it's set in 1920s Austria, so I found some nice high-definition footage, or like upscaled, modern, AI-enhanced footage from the 1920s of just driving around Vienna, which I thought was great for the atmosphere. And so all that kind of historical stuff, all that extra research, or if you're creating your own world, then a lot of that info would have to go into your sketchbook as well. Even if you don't have it fully formed yet, you can start with just the basics of the idea. You can start with, I want a world where everyone has a giant robot. And then start to sort of deconstruct from there, how would that make any sense? And when do they get the robot? Is building your own robot some kind of coming-of-age ritual? Is everybody given a robot when they're born? Why do they need the robots? Is the world they live in kind of hostile? And you can kind of extrapolate questions or interesting story avenues from just starting from the standpoint of something cool. And that's the neat thing about world building, that you don't really have to spend 7 years crafting the history of Middle-earth in order to... I mean, Tolkien did, and we revere that canon text for that reason. He did that amazing work. He did some of the most extensive world building that had ever been done up until that point. And taking all of these mythological elements and weaving them together into this dense tapestry that almost has this biblical quality to it that feels like this is the history of a world that we're just not in. He almost has this journalistic approach to, acting as this middleman between this real other place that exists somewhere and us in the real world. He's sort of showcasing the cool parts of it and telling us all about its genealogies and languages and all these things. You don't have to do that. You can start with world where everyone has a robot, or you can start with what if there was a sea monster, or anything you want. Like I'm obviously very much in the world of sci-fi, fantasy, horror stuff myself, so my ideas are always going to be something cool along those lines. Are going to be what sparks the idea in the first place. Something that fits well on a poster, or the title just sounds right, or it sounds exciting. My current book is called Bookbinder, which is a job. It's a real job, obviously, making books. But in the fantasy context, it just sparked my imagination. All the things that a bookbinder could be. It kind of almost reminds me of that Lord of the Rings quality to it, doesn't it? Like one ring to bring them all and in the darkness bind them. Like somebody who takes all the books and like wrangles and corrals them. So this is obviously a dark academia fantasy about a mad professor who's trying to become the ultimate, cultist. Basically, he's trying to, amass all the cult knowledge into one single tome. He's the bookbinder. And that's where I started with that one. So just something cool. A title that is cool is a great starting spot for fantasy, sci-fi, and horror especially. But you'll have a different idea of what is cool to you than I have of what is cool to me. And if you're writing things like rom-com, your idea of what is cool might be, what if they met at a water park or something like that, right? Like, oh, how about a lifeguard romance? That could be. Maybe that to me, that doesn't spark any interest to me. I'm like, what if a lifeguard romance? I don't know. What do you want me to do with that? But to some people, they'll go, that is so interesting and cool, and I see all the dynamics that you could draw from that. The meeting scene where he saves her from drowning would be an amazing scene to see. So you have to find that thing that just sparks to you and that immediately seems cool and that you would see on a cover or see on a poster and it just feels right. I think that's a kind of a good place to start. It's okay if you don't have the perfect version of that, but I just mean to say that you don't have to start with figuring out the genealogy, the layout of the land, the geography. Why did the tectonic plates move as they did over the formation of this world or things like that? You can start always from the foundation of what if a werewolf became a priest? Start with just cool thing as the basis of your world building and then build from there rather than start with the boring stuff then work up to something cool. Start with the cool thing and then reverse engineer to figure out the logistics. That's my recommendation at least. So once we go into sketchbook, you'll be filling that all out, and you're never really finished with a sketchbook. There's not an ending goal. And all throughout working on the story, you might be coming back to the sketchbook and taking stuff out of it or adding stuff to it. There's no real actual rules of what you're supposed to do with the sketchbook, and it's never done. Until the story's done, then you put the whole thing away. And in that sketchbook, you're going to figure out who's your cast of characters. It's going to be protagonist, antagonist, and central relationships, and other assorted side characters. If you have an ensemble, it might be a lot. And in a book, you have a lot of room. You can have a really dense ensemble in a book, much more so than you can in any movie. And last, you'll be coming up with ideas for your story world, whether it is another planet that you're designing from scratch with its own civilization and history and traditions and physics maybe that applies on that planet or things like that. It might be a version of history, like maybe you have a world that's inspired by 15th century France, but it's not quite the same, and maybe it's not called France, maybe it's just like a parallel or an analog. We see that in fantasy all the time. The idea that we start from the foundation of something real, then modify it just a little bit and build on it from there. Or maybe you are taking a realistic approach to this, and you're saying, I'm going to world build or come up with all this interesting setting detail for a place that is real. This could, you could set your book anywhere in the entire real world as well. You don't have to make up a place, and it's still world building, just on the local level. If you are trying to nail down the details of, I don't know, this takes place in downtown Istanbul or something like that, right? Then you're going to want to world build that for us. That has its own rules, has its own dynamics. The shopkeepers at the market there have their own shorthand and jargon that they use. The smells, the sights, the music that you hear. The cars driving by, all of that is all an intrinsic part of local world building as well. So we have to do these things on multiple levels. If this isn't something that is super fun for you, you don't have to spend that much time on world building. It's not really something that everyone's reading for, and I personally, when I'm reading books, I'm not reading specifically for this. Some people do read epic fantasy, epic sci-fi, and dense historicals because they are obsessed with world building. And that's totally cool for them. Not every reader cares that much, though. You can kind of do minimal world building, where it's just kind of, we see little details around your characters that ultimately sum up to a larger portrait, but it's not incumbent on us to assemble that portrait to make sense of the story, if that makes sense. We don't need to understand the full history to have fun in that story, and to maybe use those little moments of learning more about its history as like interesting trivia or things like that, and like especially if you look at YA or middle grade fantasy compared to adult fantasy, you'll see huge differences in how they approach, you know, building out a complex and realistic, well thought out world that is coherent and has its own logic to it. And we know, what did Luke say? What do they eat? What do they eat? What do they use as money? Why do they use that as money? All those things matter more in an adult context. Whereas when we're working with younger audiences, you can err a little more on the sense of wonder and fun. And like, think of a kid watching Adventure Time. Are they like, well, but why do they use gold coins as currency in Adventure Time? Is there like a national mint that I'm not aware of? Like, I don't think many kids care about the mintage situation, except for the real nerds. But those are the ones getting bullied by the other nerds, so it's okay. Just kidding, don't bully anyone. But anyway, so I hope you sort of see what I mean here. Different audiences are reading for different things, and different audiences care about different stuff, and you should just be aware of the audience you're writing towards. Even within certain genres, there's different levels of history or different levels of world building or fantasy or rules, logistics, and things like that that we want to see worked out. If you're writing hard sci-fi, you actually have to do the work and calculate how, you know, your ships have to consistently be able to reach the same distances in their hyper jumps. If in one scene they can jump to the other side of the galaxy, but in one scene they can't, then we have to ask why. Wasn't that a bigger ship? Shouldn't bigger ships with bigger hyperdrives be able to jump farther? Like, you're going to run into questions like that, and hard sci-fi fans are the ones who are going to, like, ask all those questions and be those, you know, you're dealing with the comic book guy from The Simpsons who's going to be like, in episode 37, I could have sworn that, and then you remember that, there's a lot of Simpsons references today, but there's an episode where comic book guy goes to Comic-Con and starts asking questions to Lucy Lawless, who plays Xena, and she's like, whenever there's something like that, a wizard did it. And he's like, okay, but in episode 43, and she's like, no, a wizard did that too. A wizard did it. So you can hand wave. You can say a wizard did it, if that is your preference. Okay, so after we finish with your sketchbook, you work through plotting your story beats, and that's not really I have slides from that topic in this presentation, but we don't really have to go into that because I have lots of other classes on that topic, and I'd rather focus on world building for today in this particular session, but we will be getting more into structure stuff as we move forward, and we will also have time. I want to make at least that half an hour towards the end of class today to take a look at outlines or answer any questions that you have or problems that you're having in your plotting. Okay, let's look at world building. Let's start with what are some of your favorite fictional worlds? Or if it's not a fictional world, perhaps a location, a real location that as presented in a story. All right, I'm looking in the chat. Planescape, Morrowind, Dune, great. Becky says Hogwarts, or I think it's called the Wizarding World, isn't it? Just the overall, more than just Hogwarts, but that whole universe is called Wizarding World. Nacho tells us some great hard sci-fi authors are also great scientists. David Brin has a PhD in physics. Greg Bear taught astrophysics. Oh, interesting. And Dolph Lundgren has a chemical engineering degree. So there you go. Sometimes people have expertise you wouldn't know about. Narnia. Dakota says Perlindera from Out of the Silent Planet. I've not heard of that one. Nacho says Westeros. Interesting. Westeros being one of those worlds that sucks, but people tend to still like. It's kind of fun to look at this distinction between worlds that we like and worlds we want to live in, right? Because they're not always the same. Let me turn off my air conditioning here, just one second. Okay. I actually want to ask more about that. Who really likes a world they would not want to live in? I will invite Nacho up to talk about Westeros. Most of these have a kind of wish fulfillment element to them, and that's a lot of what people like in world building. It's not the only thing that people like, though. Isn't it kind of interesting, Nacho, how some worlds are very interesting, even though it's like you would never want to go there or even to visit?
Yeah, I can offer one more from the Book of the Ancestors series, where it's like the red sister, gray sister, whatever, black. I don't remember the different colors, but like the whole world is like frozen in ice, but there's like a satellite that travels around the equator and just beams like a laser that like melts the ice. And it's like, I mean, you can imagine. And so like everybody's fighting for this little tiny stretch of like land that's not, where you can live, but yeah,
Quite a violent world too.
yeah, very lots of violence in those books. Yeah, and I guess for Westeros, it's really interesting. I guess you're asking like, would you want to live there versus is it interesting to read about or?
Yeah, I guess sort of you listed it as one of your favorite worlds. It's easy
Mm-hmm.
to look at a
Yeah.
world we want to live in and say, well, that's why I like that
Mm-hmm.
one because it's cool to imagine
Yeah.
yourself there, right? But what draws you to a
Mm-hmm.
world that you wouldn't want? That a
Mm-hmm.
world that kind of objectively sucks.
I mean, wouldn't you like to like? I mean, just yeah. I think well, in reality, like any, if you were to go back to a feudal time period in the world in Earth, it would be tough, right? Like it would be, depending on. There's a very high chance that you could get burned for witchcraft just for saying the wrong thing or whatever, right? So I think those risks of being in a world that's dangerous doesn't necessarily detract from the appeal of the world. You know uh, it's really interesting that there are like I don't know. I mean, wouldn't you like to kind of have a glass of wine with Tyrion Lannister or something? Just there are these characters that they feel like they're so fascinating that they feel almost real, right? They're kind of really fully, fleshed out. And I guess in terms of like the world, like why would it be fun to visit, even if it's dangerous? That's a good question. I mean, it feels like you could. It's almost like an anthropologist kind of interest, right? Like if you're an anthropologist and you go to some place that's real, you could spend like your whole life researching things. If you were dropped into Westeros, just all the history of every place that you visit, every town has so much history, all these different factions, like every character has some, like it sort of feels like a kind of, anthropological interest maybe.
Okay, that's cool. Yeah, so I think you also answered the question when you said the characters too,
Mm-hmm.
because it's a world where these characters live, and characters are part of the world building. They're part of the setting, and they only are the way they are because the setting kind of has forged them that way. So you want to meet those people, right? Like they're interesting to, or maybe not meet all of them. Some of them you do want to meet. Some of them
Mm-hmm.
you definitely don't want to meet, but you at least like watching what they do. The characters are interesting, and also the world is detailed and rich. And you want to
Mm-hmm.
like you can really feel the taste of the wine and the cherries at the feast, or like
Mm-hmm.
the glow of the fire while you pet the dog like the big wolfhound by the by the
Mm-hmm.
cozy rug and things like that. So I think the sensory experience of the world can come through like
Mm-hmm.
not always cozy, but like evocative
it,
sensory experiences can
it,
make us drawn to a world. I
it,
think we're really
it,
drawn in by detail and by people too, by characters that are an intrinsic part of the
it
appeal of why do we want to spend time there.
Yeah, in a way, it kind of seems like a big D&D sandbox world, right? Where you could go anywhere. You could just go to, there are all these, like, it feels like a place that would take your whole life to explore.
Yeah, so the epic scope, that kind of escapism, that idea of there's a whole new place to go, there's a whole new world that exists, and everywhere we go, there's something interesting going on. Thanks for weighing in on that,
Hmm.
Naja.
Sure.
We have a lot of worlds that we'd want to live in, or that have cool things or aspirational elements to them, and there are sometimes crappy worlds where there are still those things that are like think of Middle Earth, for instance. We only ever see Middle Earth in times of extreme crisis, unless you're reading the histories and things like that. But there is still kind of an aspirational element to going on an adventure with your friends, right? Like, and seeing all these cool places, going through Rivendell and seeing the amazing elven architecture built into these waterfalls and rivers. And then you go to the dwarven cities deep underground and this astounding, giant columns for these endless hallways that tunnel through the earth. So that sense of wonder and awe permeates all of it, even if it's not, like, even if the circumstances we're in that world are very dire, dreary, scary, or bad. Looks like we have a raised hand from Becky. Go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to comment on like smaller world building, but still worlds that we might not want to visit but love to read about. Pretty much any world that Roald Dahl created. So, you know, he was the one who did The Witches and Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Because in his world, you're either abused kids, abused, ignored kids, or you're the adults that are either just completely useless or so not really great characters to choose from. But I think what I loved about those worlds is, especially The Witches, it's one of my favourite books, is the fact that no matter how dire the world seems, no matter how little the adults are going to help the kids, it just makes the reward when the kids are successful almost all the more like great, all the more amazing. And I think that's common in children's literature. I mean, even when I said Hogwarts is dangerous as anything. Like, I wouldn't really want to be there. But I think about Charlie Bone and A Place Called Perfect and some of the other books that I've read where Charlie Bone especially, because it's not a nice school he goes to. And the worse the environment is for the kid, the more exaggerated, it's got to be very exaggerated and kids lit, but the more the kid has to then persevere, and the greater we feel for them. It's almost like the environment they're in can make us feel more like we're rooting for them, if that makes sense.
Yeah, especially because, and I think when you mentioned Roald Dahl, even in his nastiest stories, there's always someone or something to root for. Even in the Twits, the Twits is probably his nastiest story, except for the adult stuff, obviously. But like amongst the kids,
yeah,
the Twits is about a married couple that are horrible, the worst people in the world, and they hate each other. And the whole story is about them playing awful pranks on each other. But there is someone to root for. They're monkeys that they keep captive in their like behind their house, like performing circus monkeys. And then at the midpoint, we sort of switch POV from the Twits themselves. And even the author, in his great little way, is even like, okay, but we can't do the whole story just about them doing jokes on each other. So let's go over here and see something else. So we kind of like transfer POV to the monkeys that are trying to like escape from the Twits. So there is someone to root for. There is that core of like, and what is it in the Witches? We have the grandma is like always that kind of emotional core that we can go back to and root for. And what's the grandpa in Charlie in the Chocolate Factory? As even though some people see him as very some people hate Grandpa Joe. But regardless of that, though, he's he is the moral center of the story. Or I guess Charlie's the moral center, but he's like a figure that Charlie can always go back to. That he's like not a non-sinister presence in a sinister world.
Yeah, but I think it's that sinister world that adds to our feelings of Charlie, that makes us relate to him, because we have root for him, because we have other children who also won their tickets, but the world is particularly cruel on Charlie. He's the underdog, and so we root for him more because we feel like he's earned this at the end.
Right, exactly. That's so making all the other characters worse is an interesting way to root for the main character, right? Even if they're all trying to get the same selfish goal. Crime shows use this to a great effect as well. Have you ever seen Peaky Blinders?
No, I haven't. I've heard about it though.
Oh, okay, so but I think you know the idea. It's like Industrial Revolution, like early 1900s English crime show. All the characters are criminals. They're all trying to do bad stuff. How do we root for characters that are all doing bad stuff and keep razor blades in their hats to cut people's eyes, right? Well, everyone else doesn't have any principles. Like the main character is always keeps his word, and when he makes a deal or something like that, it makes a point of show the cop go off on his own and be like, no, keeping my word, that's for losers, basically. Like, let's not do that, let's betray them. Every other person they come into conflict with doesn't have that same level of principle as the main characters do, so it's easy to root for them, because although they're going for something equally selfish, they have something that we kind of do latch onto or relate to. It's a weird leap to get from Charlie Bucket to Peaky Blinders, but here we are.
That's how they succeed with. I did a whole essay for my masters on Dexter. This is before the awful season finale and then their awful second attempt. But back when it was actually good, the way they get us to it, because how else are you going to root for a serial killer and against his antagonist, who is actually the hero of every other crime thing, right? The cop is trying to track down the serial killer, but we're against him, against Stokes, because he'll catch our hero. And it's because he has morals. He won't hurt children. And he says that in the very first episode. You know, he hunts down a priest who goes after little boys. He's dug up their bodies. And he's got the priest there. And the priest is like, you're just like me. And he says, I'm nothing like you. Children, I could never do this to children. Suddenly we root for him. We're like, yeah, kill that priest.
Yep.
You know?
Exactly. It finds the aspirational quality in being a serial killer, which is kind of messed up to think of it that way, but that's the appeal of that story. It's kind of like, what if you didn't have to follow all the rules?
It is. And it absolutely is, because it's like there is this element in all of us that wants to hurt people that hurt at the most vulnerable in society. Like everyone has that. If they're not the ones hurting the vulnerable, they have that desire to see people who hurt the vulnerable be punished. That's why we have a justice system. So yeah, it's almost vigilante, except in Dexter's case, he is a monster. He's the monster that's been trained for good.
And that's so interesting. Like, that works so well. And we watch him struggle to maintain that and to be good and to fit in and be normal and have a life. And all those things make you relate to someone, whether, like, regardless of what they're doing.
Yeah. And they had to go and ruin it, but anyway, that's another story.
Well, that's how it goes. Thank you for weighing in, Becky. I see a comment from Twitch from Drowning Devil 12, who says, hello, Drowning Devil. You should come join us on Discord if you're interested in participating more. Scriptcamp.net is the website. Thanks for watching, though. Let's check the chat just to see other comments I've seen. Some other worlds people have mentioned, the Lands Between from Elden Ring. Starside/Sunside, something from Necroscope. Is that an anime, perhaps? Not familiar with that one. Man in the High Castle. Yeah, that's an interesting, obviously, world you'd never want to live in, but a fascinating kind of dystopian look at what if the Third Reich won World War II. For me, I really like these more open. Like, I'm a big fan of a lot of fantasy and sci-fi books, and grew up reading things like Sabriel and the Garth Nix books like that. I was also a huge D&D player, and Forgotten Realms is just one of these really modern classic kind of worlds that a lot of people are pretty familiar with, if not from D&D, then from things like Baldur's Gate, which I believe is set in Forgotten Realms. It's weird that I just don't know that, but yeah, I'm pretty sure it is. Or at least it's set in the, traditional, this is like what we consider to be the traditional Dungeons and Dragons world. The thing about it is that, similar to Westeros, like Nacho mentioned, it is a sandbox. This is designed to be approached from any direction you want. There's not one definitive story of Forgotten Realms. Everyone has their own story and their own approach to it, and their own characters that they make, and they become part of the world. And by playing through the game, you create your own version of it that you modify and you shape its history, and you're affected. Perhaps you can play using the canon that exists within the fiction, or you don't have to. You can make your own. You can pretend like that's never there. You can rewrite it. You can change it however you want. So, but what do I like about Forgotten Realms? It's got a little of everything. I mean, we've got your horror type setting in Ravenloft, which is like that kind of gothic area of Forgotten Realms, which is like a vampire has secluded this like little Eastern European style duchy, I guess you'd call it, in this magic mist where he keeps all his prisoners, and there are various factions that are trying to overthrow this vampire, but he's been ruling for hundreds of years over his little pocket dimension where horrible things happen, and like that's kind of like the horror themed area. We've got things like your big cities. We've got your Baldur's Gates and your Greyhawks and things like this, which are like the urban centers in this fantasy world. They're kind of like the New York City of D&D, which is always cool to see all these different, species and races come living together. You've got your orcs next to your octopus people, next to your fish people, next to your bear people, and all that. You've got like everyone living amongst each other. We've got the magical colleges and things like this. We've got your mages guilds. You've got your fighters guilds. You've got all these kind of adventurous organizations that are trying to make their mark on the world and basically just exist as a generator of unlimited fun adventures. And there are set characters within the canon of these worlds, like Drizzt, I think is the most, or is it Drizzt? I'm not sure how to say it, but I'm going to say Drizzt, who is probably the most popular character from this world. You don't have to use them, though. You always can. The fun of playing these games and running these games is that these are sandboxes for you to adjust and to make your own and to take whatever you like from. I mean, we have monsters and creatures and magics inspired by all kinds of world mythologies. We have your Egypt kind of area. You've got your like classic Scandinavian kind of fantasy place where we can find your trolls and giants and things like that. So the nice thing about this, and very similar, Forgotten Realms obviously taking a lot of inspiration from Hyboria, which is the Robert E. Howard world for the Conan stories. Hyboria is a version of early Earth that is supposed to be an uncharted lost age that exists thousands of years before any recorded history, that it's all been lost to time. And the layout is a little closer to Pangea, like all the continents are a little shoved together more than normal. And you can sort of see that he's taken, here's a bunch of real-world ancient cultures that I like, and I'm going to designate one region for each of them. You could look at, obviously this was done in the 1920s and 30s, so the sensitivity in terms of cultural world building and things like that is not really, this is what we would consider doing today. But in any case, regardless of any cultural prejudices or things like that he took like, oh, here will be the ancient Egypt place. This place will be kind of like mythic China. This place will be kind of like Dark Ages Europe. This place will be kind of like ancient Japan. Like, he kind of just took his favorite eras from history, mixed and matched, and placed them all around in the kind of general spot where you'd expect them to kind of be, given the real world layout. But then again, he's adjusted it as he has seen fit. So because of that, you can, like, that's the kind of tapestry or collage style of world building, where you sort of just look at all the stuff that I think is cool, and then what's the best way for me to arrange all that stuff in the same cohesive world that makes sense. And that kind of binding element of, this is the same world we know, but thousands of years before any recorded history, but these are like the progenitors of these modern cultures. That's kind of a nice way to tie everything together and say, we're gonna be familiar with some parts of this, but some parts you won't be. You'll recognize the styles of swords they're using, perhaps, or things like that, but the cultures are going to have different names and languages, and we'll have creatures that are inspired by their religions or folklore, but also it's its own cohesive world. So that's just one way to approach it. You don't have to do tapestry collage style. Go ahead, Becky.
It's just a question. I was interested in your opinion as we're talking about world building, and you brought up like different cultures. It's something which I've been told to be wary of, that when I'm writing, I'm going into supernatural myths, to kind of stick with my own. Obviously, I'm a debut. I'm not like an already established creator that managed to do it before people start becoming aware. But like, what's your opinion on how far you can take a culture that's not yours, as in take inspiration from a culture that's not yours within fantasy? Like, do you understand what I'm asking?
Yeah, for sure. It's a good question, and it's complicated because there are a lot of different opinions on this, and depending on who you ask, obviously everyone will have a very different take on this. So I can answer based on what I would like, and what I would like is that anyone can write anything. And like in my ideal, personally, my world view is that anyone should feel any license to use any folklore characters or creatures or gods or monsters or whatever that they want, with no restrictions at all. Given the reality of publishing, and current attitudes are usually more along the lines of you should not try to tell other cultures' stories for them, I guess is how they normally would phrase it. And it's controversial. Some people think, no, if you do enough research, you absolutely should be able to. But there are some agents that won't even look at your book, if that's the case with you, right? So it is limiting yourself, and I think you are incentivized to not do that nowadays. But then again, you can always. I think there's room there. If you, I think there's a difference between taking on a perspective of like I'm going to tell the story of this culture, versus this like I'm going to take interesting elements from that folklore or world building and weave them into something new. So I guess I would more go in that direction. I would make it a little bit more your own, probably. But you can absolutely take inspiration from an existing culture or, public
Okay,
mythical creatures and characters. Go ahead.
because it's like ghosts are so universal among all cultures,
Yeah.
and necromancy is too. And so like I've taken bits from like British history, but like it goes back to the old world. It goes back to like King Solomon had a stone to capture demons, and I'm using that for inspiration. And he wasn't British.
Mm.
You know what I mean? There was no Britain then. So it's like yeah, that's right. And then also I've got like a puka, which is Irish. But I'm not Irish, but like Ireland is still part of our little corner of the world. Do you know what I mean? It's like how far is like I get it for certain groups, there are certain things I totally get that why should you write it when someone who has that perspective writes it? And if you're writing like, I don't know, specifically about Native American myths and beliefs from a Native American's point of view, yeah, I get that. But I'm finding it hard to like, I'm doing all this research and I see a great idea. Then I'm like, oh, basically Japanese ghosts are far scarier than anything British people could come up with. And I'm looking at all this mythology and I'm like, I really wish I could do some of those Japanese ghosts and like spirits because they're awesome.
I agree. Yeah, and so it's tough. I mean, in my personal view, I think anyone should be able to. And I've written stories set in other cultures, and if you're American, you are pretty. If we were only allowed to write about stuff happening in and around America, we'd only have 150 years to draw or 200 years to draw from.
Yeah.
Right? So it would be pretty limiting overall. So I guess I would just try to avoid this sort of savior style storylines or storylines that are about foreigner comes in and learns all the ways and masters them better than the natives do kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
That kind of storyline.
And as a Brit,
Go ahead.
I've got to be careful of colonialism as well. Like all the old stories about the British going into Egypt and taking the treasures back, which, like the mummy and all of that. Nowadays, it wouldn't be seen in the best light.
Heroically taking them from their dusty tombs and putting them in a nice museum where they belong.
Yeah, it belongs in a museum.
Right, exactly. So I would stay away from those tropes, like the colonial tropes, the savior tropes, and the foreigner learns our ways better than we know them kind of tropes. But beyond that, I would err on the side of doing what's cool and what you want. I mean, an agent or no, I was going to say manager. There's no managers with books. An agent will be you will be locked out from some of them, perhaps, that have that extra sensitivity or that extra awareness of this topic. But I would let people reject you rather than self-rejecting, if that makes sense. So I would write the best book you can using whatever you think will make it the best you can, and then see what you can do with it. Beyond that, I think, what can we do, right? Like, we're just trying to we're not trying to harm anyone. We're trying to make entertainment and showcase and highlight what is cool about different cultures.
If I'm not allowed to write about another culture, then my main character whose point of view it's from, who's an American girl, and I'm not American, so sorry, America, I'm appropriating your culture.
Pretty messed up, I gotta say. Well, but although you might get tripped up on the slang, you gotta watch the slang sometimes, or the.
I am asking. I will be asking you a lot because she's specifically from California.
Oh, okay. I'm actually not I'm from Virginia personally, but I have lived in California since.
No, you live.
2015.
That's because if I had moved to America, that's where we would have moved in the 90s. We were going to. My mum had a job, and it would have been California to allow me to get into the film industry. And then it never happened, and I got diagnosed with diabetes, and it stopped it. But it was an opportunity.
Right. So I hope that answered your question. I hope that I realize it's not the clearest answer because it's not a clear topic. and everyone has their own.
No, I know
views and
it's
takes on
not.
it, but that's
Yeah,
my
I I know that my mentor and the publisher are very on the side of, if you're unsure, don't do it.
right. Makes
You know,
sense.
so
Once you're past debut, you get a lot more leeway with these things.
yeah, I can't see I'd have a problem with me picking things from the old world where, you know, Britain didn't even exist then.
No, I don't
It's,
think
it's
that's a
a
problem.
King Solomon is sort of, yeah.
No, like that's almost the biblical canon. Then at that point, I think that is a little more like there's a lot of cultures that, um, or there's so much to draw from in terms of the biblical canon that I don't think is owned by, the cultures there. At this point, they've sort of become part of a larger canon due to the religious
Yeah.
significance.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Sorry to ask you such a loaded topic.
Oh, it's all good. No, these are it's good questions. Okay, so here we are. We're looking at the main cornerstones of world building, which are physical, social, local, and mystical. Maybe I'll check the chat just for a second to make sure we don't have any questions that I've missed. Dakota's, these are people weighing in on the discussion of writing outside of your culture and things like this. Doesn't look like I missed any questions. Feel free to continue that discussion there if you'd like. Okay, so world building: physical, social, local, and mystical. Physical, the layout of the land, the things that would exist and be there if people were not there. What else is included in physical world building? Feel free to use the chats by mousing over the novel workshop and clicking the word bubble that says open chats, or you can raise a hand. Let's define some elements of world building. What goes into physical? Luke says, what do they eat? Of course, yes. So, well, this would be the stuff, what grows, I guess, would be the question. We don't have a they yet. If social is going to be like the intelligent species that live on that planet, physical is going to be just what grows there. Sure. What's the fertility of the soil like? What is the fauna? The flora being the plants. Geography, flora, and fauna, says Dakota. So, the animals, the creatures that live there. What does it look like? Is it a spaceship or a planet? Yep. Are we in a world with round planets? Like, is this a world where planets are pyramids or Mobius strips or some other shape? We don't have to follow in the world of fantasy and sufficiently advanced sci-fi. We don't really have to stick with the limitations of Earth as we know them. Physical might include things like weather. What else? Flora, fauna, biomes. Thank you, Mario. Feedback systems, drainage, tectonics, and gravity wells. Okay, so like astronomical elements too, or celestial bodies. I see a comment in this chat period, so meaning time period. That's sort of a so like where is the world in terms of age? Definitely. Wind currents and trade routes. Good, Dakota. Yep. So wind currents would be part of the physical that influences trade routes, which would be social. Trade winds, super important. Past, future, or contemporary. Yep. So if you are building a world that is linked to ours in some way, which it doesn't have to be, but if it is linked to ours, is it an analog to ours in the present, past, or future? Time can be part of it too. Luke mentions, so how does time work? Good question. Yeah, maybe your world, every 100 years it resets and starts going backwards in time. Becky mentions architecture style. So that would be social, but if there are natural formations in the world, natural bridges and things like that, then we would see that in physical. So let's move into social. Vicky mentioned creatures and magic. So magic is going to be part of mystical. Creatures could be part of both because we have the normal creatures, then we have magical creatures as well. So how about social? So we've mentioned architecture, we've mentioned trade routes. What else do we have in terms of social? We have cultures, languages, class, as Becky mentions, diets. Luke are you hungry, Luke? Do you need a muffin? What else? Social world building. Well, this is mostly that amazing Tolkien stuff, right? Where he's coming up with the dwarven languages that influence the cultures and things like that. Political issues, says Vicky. Yep. Everything from warfare to elections to regency, monarchy, dictatorships, whatever governments you have. Class, yep. Class is always an important one. Who has the money? Who has the power? Age, so how we recognize teenagers, but they used to be classed as adults, and you'd be an adult at 12, says Becky. Yeah, so this would be cultural considerations around age, I guess, is what you're saying. So, like, coming of age rituals are another really big aspect of social world building. So, is there going to be a ceremony when you come of age? Do you graduate from school? Do you get married? Religion and law are huge parts of social world building, too. Religion can also cross into mystical world building if the religions in your world are, for lack of a better word, real. How about local? Becky also mentions, are they human? So yeah, part of the social world building is also the different species that exist here. So if we are saying that animals, the lower creatures, the less intelligent ones will be part of physical, then the intelligent sapient species will be part of social. Any ideas for local world building? What do they eat? Of course. What do you eat locally? So local is going to be more centered on a specific area, and this usually pertains more to realistic world building and modern day stuff. Like imagine if we set your story in a small town. It could be a real small town or one that you make up. It's going to be not really focused on the governments of nations and warfares and things like that. It's going to be more based on, where's the bakery in the town? What's the local football scene like? Are there local? Becky mentioned local haunted houses. There you go. Absolutely, yeah. So kid-focused stories are going to be more emphasizing local world building over social world building because kids live in a sort of smaller bubble where they don't really have to worry about that kind of stuff as much. And think of kids' stories as more locally focused. What's the price of a newspaper? Says Luke. Yeah, special days I see in the chat as well. Special days meaning there might be holidays or commemorative days or things like that locally. Days that you have off from school. Days where everyone's expected to work on the fields. So this is local world building is just as it pertains to one single area within the world, not the whole world altogether. And last we have mystical. What's mystical going to include? Mario mentions local. You could consider local to be a dialect of the language. Yeah, exactly. Think of it as the dialect as opposed to the language. Magic. So mystical is going to be linked to supernatural elements in the world. Or if you're writing sci-fi, you might consider this to be hyper-tech or something like that. Ghosts. Yep. Is there magic that informs what the afterlife is? The afterlife is a huge part of mystical world building. Where do people in your world go when they die? Magic abilities or psychic abilities. Are people born with them? How do you get them? Is it illegal to have them? Are they hidden? Does anyone know about them? Aliens or religions, or are you saying alien religions not so? Sure, yeah, so we have a couple things. If you're going to consider sci-fi your hyper-tech, mystical, then, or you lump that into that same category, then the types of aliens in your world, absolutely. Types of technology that the aliens have access to. We also have religions, so maybe maybe aliens have their own religions too. Or there are religions that worship the aliens, perhaps. Mystical could be things like the killer we're hunting in the contemporary real world, things we don't know yet. I would not typically think that realistic stories have mystical world building unless you're like you might sort of suggest that if your character's like tracking down some mystical cult or something like that, maybe. But I would separate this out into stuff that's not really possible. So not every story has mystical world building, at least in my definition. You might define it differently on your own. So yeah, we have that's difference. I'm seeing in the chat difference between hard magic or soft magic. So that's something that you're going to want to determine. Are you going to be following really strict rules for how the magic works in a replicable way, or does it work differently every time? Is it completely unpredictable and no one knows what the specific effect of it will be? How is it learned as well? How is it accessed? What is the cost? So basically our main rule is that and this is like not an official rule, this is my golden rule, readers should understand enough concepts to follow the book's key events by about 40%. Like, before the midpoint, we should know everything we need to know to make sense of the story. You can still introduce new concepts as the story goes on past the midpoint, but I wouldn't make those concepts that are really intrinsic to understanding what's going on. And there's books that might defy this. If you're a reader of something like Malazan, then maybe it kind of makes you wait multiple books before understanding certain stuff. Maybe I haven't actually read Malazan. It's just my understanding that it's probably the densest and most complicated world building with the sharpest learning curve. So try to make sure that we get all the key terms defined and we're not wondering, wait, how are they moving faster than light if we're past halfway through? We need to know the basics and the essentials about by the halfway mark. Let's go over some key terms. Learning curve is how difficult it is to learn what we need to know. So ideally by that 40-50% mark. You could say a story has a steeper learning curve if it takes longer to learn all the things that we need to know or to have those rules demonstrated and taught to us. How long it takes to achieve fluency. And we're going to divide this into two separate ideas of character and reader fluency. Because the reader becomes sort of, quote, fluent in your world building when they understand the concepts and how they work, and can therefore, when your characters encounter a situation, imagine how your characters might use the tools they have access to resolve that situation. Characters have their own level of fluency as they learn more about their world as well. Think of like your Luke Skywalker starts not as like a farm boy, he doesn't know anything. And then throughout the series he becomes a Jedi Master, so he goes from not fluent at all to very fluent in not just the ways of the Force, but he also learns how the Empire and the Rebellion work and all the different factions that exist, and he learns like the ins and outs of the world overall. Last we have magic system, which we've been talking about a little bit, and these are just basically the rules that govern how mystical or the impossible things in your world are working. And you can be as hard or soft with this as you want. You can include really hard replicable rules that are almost like science experiments. You could have a softer system that is based on, the whims of the user, rather than you have to always use 35 grams of salt combined with 35 grams of iron, and then you combine those two things together, and that gets you what's called a soul powder. And then you take soul powder and you apply at least 38 degrees of heat, and you could build out really complicated chemistry equations to how your magic works. That's hard magic. Or you could just say, Dreamweavers can make whatever they want happen. And you don't really have to explain much further. Lack of explanation, you'll be erring on that sense of wonder over that sense of hard rules and replicable rules. So let's look at world building in scenes. And it looks like Aubrey273 is joining us from Twitch. Hi, Aubrey. She just says hi in the chat. You should come join us on Discord if you want to interact with us more and join the class. But if not, feel free to just watch along. We always enjoy folks joining in from Twitch, Twitter, YouTube, and even Facebook. We do stream on Facebook as well. I don't know if we can see comments from Facebook, though. Can we see? I'm not sure. But most comments we can see within a few minutes of you sending them. So thank you for being with us, everybody. We're doing world building today. So let's look at world building in scenes, and we're going to be reading from Half a King by Joe Abercrombie. I really loved this book, and it is very fast-paced in a lovely way that we stick with a single POV the entire time. So the world building is all done through him. And so our main character is named Yarvi. Why don't I just read the back of the book to get us started? There's no art beyond this snowflake with the knife on it. Let's read the back before we get into it. Prince Yarvi has vowed to regain a throne he never wanted. But first, he must survive cruelty, chains, and the bitter waters of the Shattered Sea. And he must do it all with only one good hand. Born a weakling in the eyes of his father, Yarvi is alone in a world where a strong arm and a cold heart rule. So this is kind of like a Viking-style fantasy world. Our main character is a prince with only one good hand. The other one has, or I shouldn't say good hand, he only has all his fingers on one hand. He cannot grip a shield or swing an axe, so he must sharpen his mind to a deadly edge. Gathering a strange fellowship of the outcast and the lost, he finds they can do no more than help him become the man he needs to be than any court of nobles could. But even with loyal friends at his side, Yarvi learns his path may end as it began, in twists and traps and tragedy. So this is the story of a young prince who is supposed to become the new king, and it sounds familiar, huh? He gets betrayed by his uncle and sold into slavery to be an oar slave on a merchant or like a pirate boat, basically. And it's the story of him trying to get back and reclaim his throne with these different outcasts and these slaves that he teams up with along the way. This is a world with a lot of really harsh kind of like servitude, and when you get captured by Vikings, they chain you to a boat and make you row the oar forever. That's your job forever now. Similar to Hamlet, as Dakota says. Yeah, so it kind of has that Hamlet, or The Northman was another recent movie that had that similar kind of like almost mythical style plot. So I'm going to read this one out loud, and we're going to take note of a couple different things, because we're looking at world building today, remember? And it's kind of a lot. This is like 1,500 words, but I'm a quick reader, so it won't feel that long. Don't worry. And you'll be reading along with the text behind me. Here's what to pay attention to. 1, world features and history. So this is a couple chapters in, but there has not been that much physical world building. So the nice thing about this in this style is that we sort of learn things as we need to know them. We don't dump all the info at the very beginning, but rather as the character moves through the world, we see bits and pieces, and we kind of like assemble our own picture of the world from anecdotes, little stories the characters tell, references they make, and what they call things, the names they have for things, the nicknames they have for things. All of these can go out towards building out that sense of the world features and history. The characters themselves. So at this point, we are going to join the scene with Yarvi, who we know. He's our prince with the disabled hand, and we have his fellow slaves that he just met. And those are the only characters we've met so far. In the scene we're going into, he's about to meet the captain, his new owner, basically, a pirate captain named Shadiksharam. And we're going to also be looking at dynamics. So we are building out not only the portrait of how is his life going to be on the ship in terms of his relationship to his captor, but what are the other relationship dynamics that we see on the ship as well, because there's 2 other really important ones that get built out throughout the scene. So it's a lot of heavy lifting that's done in a really good chapter, and a lot of great world building that you can do through and during a scene. That's the tricky part of this, is that we can't always be writing big, long encyclopedia articles at the start that you have to read the history. You have to kind of unveil this as we go in a way that's fun and effortless and feels very organic. And that's what we're going to be paying attention to today. So, world features and history, characters, and dynamics are going to be the focus of this text that we're reading. Let's read Yarvi. Let me drink a thing of water really quick. But we're going to read Yarvi meeting the pirate captain Shadiksharam. I've started just bringing blueberry smoothie instead, because I'm like, the bubbles in the seltzer water are going to make me burp all throughout the reading. Something about a nice blueberry smoothie that just coats the vocal cords, huh? Okay, let's read from Half a King. So Yarvi's just showed up in the boat, and we're going to meet the captain. She was very tall, sharp-featured as a hawk, with a pale scar across one dark cheek and her hair pinned up in a tangle. Her clothes were a gaudy patchwork of a dozen cultures' most impractical attire. A silken shirt with frayed embroidery flapping at the sleeves, a silvery fur coat ruffled by the breeze, a fingerless glove on one hand and the other crusted with rings, a crystal-studded belt, the gilt end of which flapped about the grip of a curved sword slung absurdly low. She kicked aside the nearest oarman so she could prop one sharp-toed boot on his bench, and grinned down the ship, gold glinting among her teeth. Right away the slaves, the guards, and the sailors began to clap. The only ones who did not join them were Sumail, her tongue wedged in her cheek, on the roof of the aft castle, the beggar, whose scrubbing block was still scraping on the gangway, and Yarvi, ex-king of Getland. Remember, we're in Yarvi's point of view, so this narration is sort of like him providing the narration. So he can still considers himself, or he still always brings up, I'm the ex-king of Getland, even though right now he's obviously a slave. Damn this bitch. Rolf forced through a fixed grin while he applauded. You'd better clap, murmured Yod. Yarvi held up his hands. I'm worse equipped for that than rowing. Little ones, called the woman, ring-covered fist pressed to her chest with emotion. You do me too much honor. Don't let that stop you trying, though. To those who have recently joined us, I am Abel Arek Shadiksharam, your captain and caregiver. You may well have heard of me, for my name is famous throughout the Shattered Sea and far beyond, yea, unto the very walls of the First of Cities, and so on. Her fame had not reached Yarvi, but Mother Gundring always used to say, the wise speaker learns first when to stay silent. I could regale you with rousing tales of my colorful past, she went on, toying with an earring of gold and feathers that dangled down well past her shoulder. How I commanded the victorious fleet of the Empress at the Battle of Fulku, was for some time a favored lover of Duke Mikados himself, but refused to become his wife, scattered the blockade at Incham, sailed through the greatest tempest since the breaking of God, landed a whale, and blah blah blah, but why? She affectionately patted the cheek of the nearest slave, hard enough for the slapping to be clearly heard. Let us simply say this ship is now the world to you, and on this ship, I am great, and you are lowly. So let's pause, and before we go through the rest of it, look at what we've heard and learned so far. So if we were to write a scene card for this scene, it might break down pretty simply, right? Shadiq Sharam introduces herself to the slaves. That's really all that's happening here. But then the more you expand it and ask, okay, but what specific tactic is she going to be using to do that, right? What is the dynamic how is she going to frame this relationship? And the way that she chooses, the specific and unusual tactic that she uses is, I'm going to frame this like we're all a family here. In the chat, I also see Luke has mentioned the aft castle, the scrubbing block. We're learning the names of the parts of the ship, so sort of that local world building, the stuff that's just right around the character. You know, what's the name of the balusters versus the railings versus the wheel versus the forecastle, the aft castle, all these things. Anything else I want to say so far? Any other comments based on just what we've seen so far? Here's one from Dakota. The character is a toxic corporate, we're a family here. Yes. Shadiq Sharam is exactly like that. So that's what's going on in the scene. She's introducing herself like, don't worry, you all. We're going to be the best of friends. You're my family members now. We're great, echoed Trig, sweeping the benches with his frown. You're lowly. Trig is like her, second in command. Fine profits today, in spite of the sad need to replace a few of your brethren. The many buckles on the captain's boots jingled as she swaggered between the benches. You will all have a mouthful of bread and wine tonight. Scattered cheers of this spectacular show of generosity. Though you belong to me, Trig noisily cleared his throat. And the other shareholders in our brave vessel. Trig nodded, cautious approval. Still, I like to think of us all as one family. The captain gathered the whole ship in her outstretched arms, huge sleeves streaming in the breeze as though she were some rare and enormous seabird taking flight. I, the indulgent grandparent, Trig and his guards, the kindly uncles, you, the troublesome brood, united against merciless Mother Sea, ever the sailor's most bitter enemy. You are lucky little children, for mercy, charity, and kindness have always been my great weakness. Rolf hawked up phlegm in disgust at that. Most of you will see the good sense in being obedient offspring, but perhaps, and Shadiq Sharam's smile collapsed to leave her dark face a caricature of hurt, there is some malcontent among you thinking of going their own way. Trig gave a disapproving growl. Of turning his back upon his loving family, of abandoning his brothers and sisters, of leaving our loyal fellowship at some harbor or other. The captain traced the fine scar down her cheek with one fingertip and bared her teeth. Perhaps even of raising a treacherous hand against his doting carers. Trig gave a horrified hiss. Should some devil send such thoughts your way, the captain leaned down towards the deck, think on the last man to try it. She came up with a heavy chain and gave it a savage tug, jerking the filthy deck scrubber from his feet, and squawking over in a tangle of limbs, rags, and hair. Never let this ungrateful creature near a blade. She stepped onto him where he lay. Not an eating knife, not a nail trimmer, not a fish hook. She walked over him, tall heels grinding into his back, losing not the slightest poise in spite of the challenging terrain. He is nothing. Do you hear me? Damn this bitch, muttered Rolf again as she hopped down lightly from the back of the beggar's head. Yarvi was watching the wretched scrubber as he clambered up, wiped blood from his mouth, retrieved his block, and without a sound crawled stiffly back to his work. Only his eyes showed through his matted hair for an instant as he looked towards the captain's back, bright as stars. Now, shouted Shadiq Sharam, swarming effortlessly up the ladder onto the roof of the aft castle and pausing to twirl her ring-encrusted fingers. Whoop. South, to Thorlby, my little ones. Profits await. And Ankren? My captain, said Ankren, bowing so low he nearly grazed the deck. Bring me some wine. All this blather has given me a thirst. You heard your grandma, roared Trig, uncoiling his whip. There were clatters and calls, the hissing of rope and the creaking of timbers as the few free sailors cast off and prepared the south wind to leave the Volsgard's harbor. What now? Murmured Yarvi. Rolf gave a bitter hiss at such ignorance. Now? Yod spat into his palms and worked his two strong hands about the polished handles of their oar. We row. And that's the end of that chapter. Thanks for listening, guys. Let's answer some questions. What do we notice about the world, features, and history, the characters, and the dynamics? You can pick any of the above. Becky says, there are slaves. Meaning, as you mean like the society has slaves. Yes, exactly. So this is a society with slavery. Mm-hmm. What else? There's lots of world building done. Just in this one, I think it's like 1,500, maybe almost 2,000 words. The gold implies a lot. What does the gold imply? The scar, yep. So scars, the things that the physical features of characters can tell a story about them, can't they? We have piracy, yep. Stolen wealth. Seems like Shadik Sharam might be stealing stuff from every conquest and wearing a sort of patchwork collage of it. Dakota mentions there's a clear historicity of events with this grandiose and nihilistic dialogue. Yeah, what does she say? Let's go back to her anecdotes. Do we believe her anecdotes? I see that's kind of a fun thing about it as well, is that even though we've never heard of any of these things before, immediately you're like, did she really do any of that? What does she say? I could regale you with the tales of my colorful past. I commanded the victorious fleet of the Empress at the Battle of Fulku. I was the favored lover of Duke Makedas. I scattered the blockade at Inchim. I sailed through the greatest tempest since the breaking of God. Referring back to historical events in the world as a way of building character and also the world at the same time. Dakota says we shouldn't believe her, don't or shouldn't, but we haven't had a choice because this is the unreliable information. Yeah, exactly. Somebody being very boastful of her achievements in her past might be exaggerating. Another comment from the chat referring to herself as grandma is interesting. Yeah, so she's framed herself as this kindly, loving grandma who's going to make you cookies for being her loyal little slave. And if you ever decide to not do what grandma says, well, she doesn't want to do this, but she's got this guy here who's going to beat you up. Luke says, might be the same thing as your boss telling you about all the awards he's won, but the awards aren't as prestigious as they sound. Yeah, what's that one from Star Wars? I made the Kessel Run in less than 12 parsecs. And then there's all this backfilled retconning where it's like, but parsecs are not a measurement of... What is it? It's so silly. It's like backfilling a line to make it make sense, and Obi-Wan... but Obi-Wan knew that Han was full of crap because he knew that parsecs were not a measurement of time, but of distance, things like this. Amber mentions the Duke, so there's nobility. Yep, we're seeing some references to different nobility structures. The Duke, we have ancient battles that she's referencing to, the Battle of Fulku. We never learn in the book what that actually is. We never learn what almost any of these things are. But even if we don't, it still builds out the world. Having your characters refer to stuff that we never see and you never even plan to show can still be really effective world building. Can I scroll to the button again? Yeah. Let me bring Luke up. Go ahead.
So yeah, this basically, there's some subtext here. It's like, what do we do? Like we're like, what the hell can we possibly do? Like, what do we do? The answer is we can't do anything.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the whole point of this. We are slaves. We're helpless.
Right. And did in terms of characters that were introduced here, do you remember the one that she walked on? How do we kind of signal that guy will be important later? Did you get that vibe of this guy will be important? We're marking this for a reason?
Definitely did.
How'd you get
I'm not sure what stuck out to me about that.
I think to some extent it's just the time that's spent on it, right? So we spend more words on something, we expect something to matter more. But beyond that, let's look at it again.
Okay.
Scrubber, as he clambered up, wiped blood from his mouth, and this is the ending of it, the last part. and without a sound crawled stiffly back to his work. Only his eyes showed through the matted hair for an instant as he looked towards the captain's back, bright as stars. To me, that
moment.
is what says, this guy's planning something. This guy's thinking, this
Yeah.
guy knows something we don't know.
Or he's planning revenge. You know, you can just imagine him visualizing like plunging a dagger into her back in that moment or something.
Exactly, yeah. And we see he gets the worst treatment of anyone. She's not even pretending to be his grandma. She's like, if you leave the grandma cult, then I will step on you. It's the worst sentence I think I've ever said.
I mean, it's true though. It's very corporate. It's very that toxic. We're all a happy little family while I step on you and flash my gold rings and stuff. Yeah.
You'd expect what she wants is for them to go, thank you for stepping on me. Like, I feel so privileged to be in Shadiq Sharam's crew. She's such a kindly master, and every time we act up, we deserve to be punished.
And you have to question: does she genuinely view herself that way, or does she know that she's full of it? Like a good villain, you don't really know either way.
Yeah, to me, I think this part where she almost is taunting them a little bit, sort of says that she knows this is bullshit. I mean, she's making them clap for her to begin with, and also, her smile collapsed to leave her dark face a caricature of hurt, and she's like, unless there's some malcontent that doesn't want to behave. Like, that's what makes me feel that she actually is doing this to amuse herself more than anything else, and like she gets some kind of fulfillment from this.
Yeah, the joy is pretty evident.
Nasty character, huh?
Pretty nasty. I mean, I've met nastier people in real life.
You have? Oh, God. Sorry to hear that.
Several, yeah.
Thank you, Luke.
Some of them are close relatives.
Oh.
Anyway.
Wow. Say no more. Say no more.
Yeah.
So, I know that was a lot of reading, so thank you for listening to all of that. Ideally, as novelists, I didn't think that was way too much, everybody. But these are always things that we can be doing during the scenes. That we're talking about world building in abstract a lot, like how do we come up with a history of the world and languages and things like this. But when we're delivering it, it has to be through interesting action and through watching characters do interesting stuff. And then we can build the world around that. You never have to like chart out every single last blade of grass and every king and every descendant of every king. You can just build what's around us and allow that to draw us into the story and leave some questions unanswered or unexplored, because that makes the world feel bigger. Does that make sense?
I think so.
Any questions or thoughts before we move on?
Well, it's iceberg theory, you know.
Yeah, can you explain that?
You show the tip of the iceberg, and the audience will understand that the breadth and width underneath is much more massive than what they're actually seeing on screen or reading on the page.
Right, exactly. So we only ever need to show the top of the iceberg, and then we have glimpses of the other parts of the iceberg that make it feel like there's more there. There doesn't actually have to be more there. It just has to... The verisimilitude of world building comes from feeling like, well, if we did explore, then we would find more cohesive world building, or we would find the answers to those questions. We would learn about what the Battle of Fulku actually was and who it was between and all of those things. Okay, so I've got a bunch more slides on everything from sci-fi to big ideas in sci-fi, world building galaxies, how to show world building on the page. You know, the text on here got a little goofed as we transferred the slides from one presentation to another. Let me just check if there's anything else that I wanted to touch on. And yeah, as you can see in the sci-fi context, we would substitute science for mystical. Let's just check to see what else I want to do. We're getting towards our last half hour, so I think I will pretty soon open it up to anyone that wants to ask questions about their outline or their own world building. Yeah, I don't think we're going to look at the sci-fi stuff today. Come to Luke's sci-fi group if you'd like to talk more about that, though. So, Luke, let them know when the sci-fi is in the chat, if you would. Becky, do you have a question or comment? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk a little bit about you mentioned before that kids' books, the world building is all very local because obviously kids' worlds are smaller. And if you didn't mind, I just wanted to talk a bit about how that doesn't mean it's lesser
Sure.
Like, I think it can be easy to think, and it doesn't just apply to kids, it applies to any kind of world building you're doing that's not like an epic world. I think that sometimes, because I've fallen into this trap, or I've gone, oh, I don't need to think about like how society works because it doesn't affect my main character. And then I'm like, yeah, but it affects the people my main character interacts with. And therefore, it might affect the way they react to things. As an example, you have a kid that goes off exploring, doing, investigating. If that's in our contemporary world, social services would want to get involved because, the parents are being neglectful. Do you know what I mean? It's that kind of thing can be brought into it. So, yeah, I suppose I just wanted to mention, and it's the same with when you do historical. Like everyone knows, if you do a historical novel, you've got to make it really accurate, like with the main facts. That's just as true for like kids lit. And I would argue that world building is probably more important as important in kids lit as it is in something like a romance. So it's something like a fantasy. So more important in kids lit, all of kids lit, than say a contemporary, because adults can kind of infer. So where you're talking about having more under the iceberg, one thing I have noticed is that I put things into my books that kids never pick up on, and some of them I like that because it's just part of the world. To me, it's just like, well, this makes sense in this world, and they never pick up on it, but it's still there. Like certain ways people address people in the future. But like, I have found that if there's something that I think the kids need to know about, is one thing I will say is that the iceberg for its world building, if it's important, needs to be a lot more exposed. If it's important to the plot, if it's just something that you've created within the world because you think it's cool, in my murder mystery, I've made it that no one is called Mr. or Mrs. There's no like address like that. We've got rid of putting someone, Mr. Kyle. Your name is just, if it's formal, Conor Kyle, and if we're friends, it's just Conor, and that's not obvious when you're reading it, but it's a conscious decision I've made, but it doesn't affect the story. I don't need to spell it out. Like,
Wait,
I do need to really spell out.
It's in like a different culture or a different world where those terms don't exist?
Yeah. This is set on a starship in the future.
Oh, that's
where they don't have any contact with Earth. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That makes sense.
Whereas the class differences between all the starships, I've had to make very clear from the outset that Theo is on Epsilon, it's the lowest class ship, and Pandora, the other girl, is on Alpha, and it's the highest class ship, and that it wasn't obvious enough in my earlier drafts for children, and it's such an important part of the plot. I've had to expose that a lot more and make it a lot more on the nose than I would say in an adult book.
You can also, I think, in terms of younger demographics, also the more visual your world building elements are, then the more fun we can sort of imagine them to be. Like, if you have magic, then having it be colorful and cool and let you fly and shoot lasers is usually, I would err on that side, as opposed to mental magic where you think stuff and make stuff happen in your mind.
Yeah, so one of my other books, the girl's ability is a photographic memory, which in an adult book, you could just accept that. But in a kid's book, it needs to be visual. So I've had her literally go into her mind of memories and interact with her memories, because otherwise it's just kind of, okay, she's got photographic memory, great. Yeah, what do I need to do with that?
What does that look like? It just looks like a kid thinking, I guess. Like, she thought about it for a while, and then she remembered the answer.
Whereas actually having her go into a memory and research the scene, look at the scene, and then going, oh my God, I did see him do the code in the door, because she's just seen it again, because we've seen it again because we're in our head. Yeah. So yeah, I agree with that. It's got to be a lot more reliance on sight and sound, I would say.
Yeah, and flashy stuff that's cool and feels like fun to play around with. Stuff that you would be able to play the game with your friends. Like, how easy is it for you to play Harry Potter with your friends in the woods? You just need a stick, or a big. You can do a small stick, or you can have a big stick. Either way, that's all you need.
Yeah, and you can still like create atmosphere and all of that, but it is true that, for example, take Harry Potter, Hogwarts, the school, is a character in its own right. Harry Potter wouldn't be as big if it wasn't for Hogwarts.
Right. Yeah. Very true. It has that really strong wish fulfillment element to it, where
and you think about a lot of the kids' stuff. That is the case. You know, the in Frozen, Arendelle is its own character, the place where they live, and you know, just thinking about whereas if you look at so one thing I noticed this, if you've ever watched Star Trek Prodigy, which is an animated Star Trek made for teenagers, it's whereas in Star Trek it's a spaceship. Yeah, it's got, you can see all the things like the transporters and everything, but it's kind of like the characters aren't wowed about it, so we just see it as, oh, this is going to be normal one day. How brilliant is that? Do you know what I mean? Whereas these are kids who have found this spaceship and gone in, so they're wowed by the technology. So suddenly, watching it from a distant perspective, and you're like, yeah, do you know what? That technology is really amazing, isn't it? And it's stuff that we've been watching for decades and hasn't, you know, suddenly it's like, oh yeah. So it really is that thing of, in Prodigy, the kids, the spaceship has a personality of its own.
Right.
That they're in.
And it feels like a nice way to introduce a new audience to it by finding what's fun in it again, and like rediscovering it for the first time. Because kids don't usually watch Star Trek. Is not like kids' show, or it's not really for kids in general. So I think that makes a nice entry point for them to find the cool, fun aspects of this universe and play around with them, and use that to get our interest in, like, and to reel them into the wider world of it.
Yeah, exactly. And they do end up interacting with the wider world of Star Trek, even within that season. Or I think it was season 2, started interacting. But again, it's that, like you say, kids start off local at first. I mean, the whole point of a starship is to be able to travel to other planets. But at first, they're just getting to grips with a starship.
Right. Or the house that we just moved into, or the school, the new school. There's so much new school, so many new school scenes in middle grade and YA books.
Oh yeah, there is so much.
It's almost a freebie.
But even
go ahead.
Even when characters are in a world that they know, so like there's a British book called Violet Vale, which is about a girl who can speak to ghosts, and she lives by a graveyard, and it's nothing new. She's not moved there new or anything. The new thing that comes into her life is a dead boy that's woken up. He's not by magic or anything. He wasn't dead. It was set in the Victorian era, so they thought he was dead, and it turns out he wasn't. And it's this whole mystery. But the way that we see the world, even though for her graveyard is normal, she always goes out there when she's like feeling down and wants to, like, you know, talk to the spirits. Even though it's normal for her, it's still cool. You know, it's still like it's still something magical and whimsical. Whimsical's a good word for. And when you talk about magic systems, hard and soft, I think you can get away with a lot more softer, obscure, like really weird stuff. So in a place called Perfect, it's all about these people are trying to make you see the world differently. You know, the whole saying of seeing the world through rose-tinted glasses.
Oh, right.
So they want to give you, rose-tinted eyes so that you see their village the way they want you to see it, and they make you behave perfectly, and everyone does everything perfect, so it's a perfect little village. And he's literally growing eyeballs, these rose tinted eyeballs as plants, and is going to be doing eye transplants on everyone. That's the kind of thing that kids just go, well, yeah, that makes sense. Rose tinted glasses, yeah, make it rose tinted eyeballs. Then they see the world as perfect. Why wouldn't that make sense? And as an adult, it's like,
Horrifying.
rose tinted glasses is just a saying. Well, horrifying, and also it's just saying. So it's that kind of, you can take things, and I love finding like things that kids would find fascinating that adults just look at. My mum read that book and she's like, it's weird.
Yeah, it's like the Coraline thing where kids, have we talked about this before? I think we have, where kids see it as less scary than the adults do, usually, because of the whole idea being the whole idea of somebody else trying to like be a parent to your kid instead of you is like really viscerally terrifying for an adult. But for a kid, it's like, oh, it's my other mom. It's no big deal. Like, obviously, having button eyes is pretty scary, but
yeah,
it's not scary in the same way for kids that it is for adults.
yes, and it's really funny that you and other people are shocked sometimes at what I put in a kid's book, because it sounds really scary, but for the kids it's not. And my friend who wrote, I will be honest here, my friend Sophie Tevi wrote Violet Veils, so I plugged it, and but she's published by HarperCollins, and it's like a 9th book or something. She said to me that what was really interesting was that she just put things in and let the editor take out what was too scary for kids.
Yeah.
Because she learned very quickly that there were things she put in that she was sure would be removed. There's a serial killer in this one, you know? And that was all absolutely fine. And yet, she put in one line about the girl often thinking about the dead asleep on their stone pillows. And that apparently was too scary for kids because it made them scared to go to sleep.
Okay, but a serial killer won't? What? All right, but
because a serial killer feels distant, but kids go to sleep every night, and they're like, "What if I die in my sleep?"
Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, so
it makes sense, but it's not something we think about.
Go ahead.
Yeah, it's not something we think about. Go on.
I was gonna say it's similar. I would treat it as similar to the cultural thing we were talking about earlier. Like, don't self-reject. Put it all in, and then let someone else do the rejecting for you. You don't have to like censor.
Yeah.
You're on your own. Let the censor do the censoring.
Yeah.
Let's open it up to Open Lab. Thank you for the thoughts and comments, Becky. So, who has questions about world building or their outline?
Sorry, me again. I was hoping, but we don't know if we've got time. I changed the beginning bit of my outline. You know, we looked at it at workshop, and then we decided to move where the incidences happened. I was hoping if I put it in here, you don't have to look at the whole thing, because most of the ending's the same. It was just that beginning bit, the normal world, the
First act?
old adventure, the end of Act 1.
Sure. Yeah, I'd be glad to. Just because we've been chatting a bit, do you think we can open it up and just see if anybody else has something to share, and then I'll come back to you?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Like I say, I was just hoping if we've got time.
We probably will. I just want to make sure everybody gets a chance. Maybe if any new folks have showed up, then feel free to ask your questions about your world building or outlining. And then we'll come back to Becky. Earl, go ahead.
I'm writing a superhero novel, and in this world, superheroes are pretty much government agents, and they live that operates in a secret society.
Okay, awesome. Do you have a question, or is there some issue you were trying to resolve, or some gap you were trying to fill, or something like that?
Yeah, I'm trying to figure out how. Right now, I'm just figuring out how can I make this society operate, so to speak.
How can you make a superhero world where superheroes work for the government operate? Is that the question?
Yes.
Okay, so the first questions you'll have to ask are, who has superpowers and where do they come from? Different worlds approach this in different ways. If you're going with the kind of Marvel hodgepodge type of world, then people get superpowers from all kinds of things. Like it could be a
Yeah,
science experiment.
Yeah,
it could be
that's
magic.
pretty much it.
Oh, it's just anything?
Yeah, pretty much it. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not gonna explain how they get their superpowers because that's not the point of the story I'm working on.
Okay, but you're saying it's a world where people can get powers from a variety of different sources?
Yeah, sometimes it works 50-50. Sometimes you can get radiation. You can get superpowers from radiation, but sometimes you can get cancer. So it's like sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't.
Okay, so sort of inconsistent. So kind of a chaotic world of people with all kinds of different powers and power levels. So if that's the case, then you might imagine the government. Well, first of all, if this has always been happening all throughout history, does the world even resemble our modern world at all? Because chances are it probably realistically wouldn't resemble our modern world if people have always had superpowers all throughout history. I mean, if like Genghis Khan could shoot lasers out of his eyes, like would the world look the same as it does today? In the world of Marvel and stuff like this, we can, or like the world of comic book fiction, we can kind of overlook that to some extent. But if you really think about it, if people have always had powers, the world would not resemble our current modern world. There would just be too many digressions. So you do have to ask, do I want the world to actually resemble our current modern day one? And then if so, then you would ask questions like, which country has access to which heroes? Are there very powerful heroes that work for, countries that aren't doing as well socioeconomically or things like this? And why wouldn't they not just take over the countries if they wanted to? So the world would be like, the political spheres are going to be divided very differently if a single person can take out a whole army, right? So there's other stuff to think about there. And let's go back to actually our chart of all the major topics. So in terms of physical, if it's just Earth, then you don't have to worry too much about that, except beyond maybe how ancient people with superpowers may have shaped or formed the land itself. Or maybe there are psychic storms or some other alien phenomena or things like that that affect the world too. In terms of social, you have superheroes working for the government, so you need to know things like which governments have which heroes, who has the strongest team, which, like who are the major players worldwide, things like that. And questions like, do you have to register as a superhero? If you find out that you have powers, do you have to go in and be interviewed by the government to make sure you're not a threat? Do you get conscripted in certain countries where maybe Soviet Russia, everyone that has powers has to join the army or something like that, right? Are there jobs that are connected to that, like people that go from house to house checking people with powers to see if they're good fits? So there might be different jobs that exist in any world based on the social world building that you do. Cleaning up after all these heroes is another full-time job, I would imagine, is when you punch a building apart, there's a lot of rubble.
Yeah, I even have a thing where like there's even like sirens in case like a fight is happening for the public to take safety.
Right. Okay, so it's pretty normalized in your world, it seems like, in that case. So you might consider all of the safety measures that need to go into living a normal life. Are the buildings heavily reinforced in urban areas or something like that? Does the Empire State Building have an anti-aircraft gun on top of it just in case somebody with powers decides to blow it up or something like that? The fabric of society would be super different in a world where we have to run the risk of psychopaths with magic, essentially. And then last, you'd have the local and mystical world building to do, which would be determining, just in the country that your story is set, if it's America or something like this, is there like a police force of superheroes, or are they like the army, or are they like the FBI? Kind of figure out the more specifically, how does that government structure work? How do those jobs work? And in terms of mystical, the heroes that you have in your story, how do their powers work? How many lasers can Superman shoot out of his eyes before he has to rest? And when he rests, how does he get his power back? What are their weaknesses? What are the limitations of their power, and will those change over time? Things like that. Superhero mystical world or superhero magic systems are usually pretty defined.
I have written like limitations for some of my characters.
Great. So yeah, superheroes often have not only weaknesses or weak points, but also there's an extent to their powers. You can only shoot so many lasers. You can only lift up a tank. You can't lift up a building. Things like that. So it might be helpful to put those limits in your sketchbook, or like while you're doing that world building, figure out what is the most that you could do with these powers.
Yeah, that's what I'm working on. That's what I'm definitely working on. That's why I gave them like limitations and weaknesses and whatnot.
Great. All right. Sounds like you're on the right track. Any other questions or things you want? I just gave you. That was just sort of an overview, I guess, of all the stuff.
Oh, I think
Go ahead.
I think I got what I want. I'll definitely take what you said to heart.
Great. Thank you so much for the topic. All right. Anyone else? Question about your world building? Here's a question from Vicky. I had a question about world building related to how to keep a world consistent where the main focus of the plot is not the world, so to not make the reader of the specific genre not feel like things are moving too slow. I kind of got lost in that question a little bit. Related to how to keep a world consistent when the main focus of the plot is not the world, so as to not make the readers of the genre not feel like things are moving too slow. Oh, okay. So I think you're saying how to not overload us with information dumping about the world. I think that the scene that we read from today, to me, was a good example of how to kind of approach this, which is we should primarily be watching interesting scenes playing out. We're not reading because we want to read a textbook, and we don't want a big description of histories and cultures and things like that. We want to see your characters interacting with stuff. So I would start from the basis of interesting scene, character with a strong goal, all those fundamental things, and then as they move through the world, look for what organically would kind of present itself in terms of the world building, and the things that the characters would notice or remark upon, or things they would have to deal with. You know, instead of having a long chapter about all the pollution in your world and all the ways that it's affected the economics, have your characters come to a river, and the river is glossed with the rainbow sheen of gasoline. You know what I mean? And they have to now cross that river, and it's disgusting and polluted and all that, and they get to the other side. So now we just haven't told you about it. We've created a scenario in which the characters are forced to interact with and overcome that thing, and we learn about it at the same time. I would usually try to stick to that kind of approach. I think did I see a hand raised from Dakota? Oh, it's gone now. Any other questions? Oh, there's one. Dakota, go ahead.
Hello. So, yeah, I don't really have like a question, but I guess something to keep in mind is don't spend 2 years trying to figure out how everything works in the world and your map, because that's what I did. I spent way too much time on geography and plate tectonics and trade winds and the historicity of cultures and the textile industry and the trading systems and the currency systems. I basically pulled this Hulkin. I pretty much did the Similarian without meaning to.
People call this I wrote world builder's disease sometimes.
Yep, exactly. Right. In the chat, I have a map that's very pretty. It's a very realistic map. This map is a plausible place, but I will most likely never use it because there's nothing. I can't. I'm too bogged down with and overwhelmed with literally everything that I researched over almost 3 years. So cautionary tale, do not do this. Please.
Cool,
do not spend so much time.
Well, you could run a heck of a D&D campaign at least.
There you go.
That's a great. If you're obsessed with world building, play role-playing games, because you're going to be able to get so much more out of just coming up with cool world stuff. You're going to have an audience right away that can react to and enjoy that stuff, rather than say, well, you're never going to see any of this. Like, if we can't ever use it, then why do we spend all the time on it? But yeah, we will take your warning to heart. Thank you, Dakota. World builder's disease. I saw a hand raised from Michelle. Go ahead.
Hey, so I'm trying to decide which era to put my sci-fi story in. I'm thinking between the 2050s to 2080s. And I know AI will be, fully developed. Well, at least it may never be fully developed, but it'll be far more developed than it is now. And I need to think about how AI will play a role in that, unless I'm going to make it happen in 2030 or something, But anyway, and I'm just not sure exactly how to predict that unless I just don't address it, And it's maybe some alternative world. I don't know.
This is the solar flare type, the story, the disaster story about the Earth dealing with a solar flare.
No, it's not a solar flare. It's a gamma ray burst from a collapsed star that has become a black hole, and the gamma ray burst is what is emitted as the last breath of the star.
Oh, okay. And your question is, how does AI play into the story, or how could it?
Well, I know that AI is going. That. I guess how AI is going to play into this could AI be used to solve this? Because I found out that people don't actually have to spend the next half century or more underground. They don't have to do that. They just have to be protected for about 5 years. Maybe 10 at the most. So you don't have to worry about staying underground as long, So that's that makes it much more doable.
So I'm missing the connection to AI here. Are you saying so we would be what problem would we be able to solve using AI in this case?
Well, maybe AI would be used by different governments to solve. Oh, this is exactly how much we need of this and this and that, and to be underground for say the next 5 to 10 years, for most of the world's population, instead of the next 100 years, so that's why I'm trying to figure out exactly how that will be used. And you mentioned something about CDs. Maybe we won't have CDs. And I'm thinking we're going to have some kind of recorded medium, if it's not going to be online. And that'll be something that'd have to be underground, would have to be AI. I mean, computers, they'd have to be underground. Because satellites will stop working. They may just be blown from the sky, by that. So we're going to have to have some way of communicating worldwide. So we may have to go back to transatlantic cables or something,
That could be. I mean, that might be a little outside the scope of your story if it's mostly focused on the disaster and not so much rebuilding afterwards.
Right.
But that aside, so just to answer your question, I can give you some ideas of how AI might be used in this case. I think the most relevant ways would be modeling simulations. So both simulating not just what is the path that the burst will take through space and when it will hit and things like that. We could use AI to help with those things, but I don't think we're entirely reliant on it. And then also to model simulations of how many people will be affected and where are the best places to go or where are the best places to put shelters or, to coordinate the logistics of the survival effort. I think AI could come up in those cases, but I don't think it's going to affect your story enough to drastically cause you don't have to drastically rethink it, because we already have there are already government structures and people and systems in place to deal with emergencies. We already have that now. Adding AI to them would not drastically change how they work, I don't think. I mean, it's going to be the same people using AI to help with their jobs, but I don't think they're going to approach it in some drastically different way unless you have robots, slaves, or something like that, right? Unless we have robot workers walking around that we could maybe use to assist in the logistics of the effort. But I don't think that, so in your specific instance, I don't think AI would be such a game changer that you have to drastically rethink the whole world.
Well, and I'm trying to also think of what recorded medium. The reason I think CDs might still be around is because they're quite effective. They're not that wide to store, and they you can scratch them quite a bit and they still work. So I don't know. That's why I think maybe CDs might still be around, and thumb drives I think might. Well, I think those might be modified to some extent to be more to be a little bit more the entry of lightning cables, for an iPhone. But other than that, I think that's pretty much, oh, well, maybe some of those chips you can put in a phone. or a camera.
SIM card, or
You
something,
know,
like the little, yeah, the tiny micro SD or things like that.
yeah, you know, but you know, I think those are, you know, like within the next 80 years, that might be, you know, or 70 years, I mean, might be, you know, maybe some of the how things might change, you know. So, I mean but that's pretty much it. The world building is the same, world, you know. It just now has to go underground.
Right.
You know.
Did we address your question about the AI ideas, or did that give you some stuff to think about in terms of
Yeah,
how AI might be
and
used?
I think I'll go to ChatGTP and ask ChatGTP what it thinks.
Sure. Yeah, that'll give you some great ideas.
Okay, well, thanks. I appreciate it.
Sure. Thanks for sharing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We're getting towards the end, so I will stay a couple minutes over just to take a look at Becky's first act. Becky, do you want us to end the recording, or should we keep going?
Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, it's up to you. Apparently, I'm allowed to share my outline. I'm just not allowed to share it on using the specific format that Golden Egg uses.
Oh,
So I've changed it to be your format with your titles.
great. Okay,
So
that sounds good.
that's okay.
So since we're at the end, let's. I think I'll just dismiss everyone and say you can head out, or you can stay and watch this if you really want to. We'll take like 10, 15. Well, do you think we can cover the first act in about 15 minutes?
Yeah, I reckon so. Well, it depends on how much you go into detail.
Sure. Okay. So yeah, I'll say thank you for joining, everybody. Let's remind us what the upcoming events and classes will be. So we have these free ones coming up in this Friday, 6 to 8 p.m. time slot. Tone and Genre on the 24th. Victory Lap, which is all about third act stuff, on the 31st. Pilot Intro on the 7th. And first week of Pilot course on the 13th. Remember, you should sign up at scriptcamp.net if you want to take more than just the intro classes in any course, because we go all the way up to 6 weeks for Pilot, 8 weeks for Feature, and 90 days for the novel. So definitely come sign up if you want to join any of these great activities or weekly groups. The website is scriptcamp.net. Thanks for joining, everybody. This was a great discussion on world building, so thank you for all your comments, and we hope to see you soon at your next event. Have a great rest of your weekend.